alteration because we a priori understand that it is the same thing that was in the light and now is in shadow. Uh, Without the idea of time and succession, we would understand those as being different beings, uh, not alterations in the same being, uh, but fundamentally different things. So, change, to experience something as change, requires already having an understanding that things subsist through time. That is to say, that there is succession of moments in time, and that things remain the same through time. So that we experience motion and change externally, there is no denying. Kant says, absolutely. Of course there's motion and change. Of course there's motion and change in external bodies, and we experience that. But the fact that we're able to experience that isn't due to something that exists in those external bodies themselves, but is made possible by something within us, which is this representation of time as succession, that we're able to process these differences in the external world as change, is due to this a priori inner representation of time as succession. So, the concept of motion is only possible through and in the representation of time, that if this representation were not a priori, intuition, then no concept, whatever it might be, could make comprehensible the possibility of an alteration. Right? So if this representation were not a priori, no concept could make comprehensible the possibility of alteration. Right? Time is the only thing that makes alteration comprehensible, i.e., of a combination of contradictorily opposed predicates, e.g., a thing's being in a place and the not being of the very same thing in the same place, right? So movement is only possible. We can only understand, comprehend movement because we already have an idea of succession. Only in time can both contradictorily posed determinations in one thing be encountered, namely successively. Right? It is change, ultimately, then, it is time that makes all change possible, right? That the table can be green and then be painted red is only possible because of time, right? If it were not for time, it would be impossible for us to understand that the table could be both red and green. Right? Were it not for succession, change would be incomprehensible. Okay. So I think that's hopefully, it's a very complicated idea, but in conjunction with what we said about space, I think we've covered a lot of those four main arguments that Kant makes on 179 about why time is subjective. And he concludes, time is nothing other than the form of inner sense, i.e., the intuition of our self and our inner state. So why is time then inner? Motion, change are external. Why is the intuition that allows us to understand change an internal intuition? Right? And we still haven't talked about this problem of linearity, time being like an arrow, but we're going to get to that. So time is the way we process ourselves, right? Time is the way we process ourselves sensing the world. I sense this, and now I sense this. I have this impression, now this impression, now this impression, right? So what I am conscious of when I'm conscious of succession is not the thing outside of myself, but a succession of representations of that thing within myself. Right? So I grasp the thing as existing externally through my sensibility, my spatial intuition, and I represent it to myself, right, in that instant, in T1. However, I then receive a new impression through my sensibility, intuit it spatially, represent it to myself, and I then, through my intuition of time, understand that my representation of the external thing in T1 is connected to my representation in T2. That these representations are connected, and they are connected through succession. Time is what connects, what unifies our external intuition, our external sensations, or our sensations that represent external things. Time is our ability to unify our experience. Right? The subject is what unifies experience, right? Just like Descartes, the I is the center, and it is our intuition of time as intuition, that that unifies all those experiences and allows us to make sense of them as successive, as sustaining themselves in some way. They sustain themselves through our representation of them. And time is the part of our representation of the external world that gives it unity. Right? So time determines the relations of representations in our inner state, Kant says. Right? And this is, he says, it represents the temporal sequence through a line progressing to infinity. Okay, so time is this inner intuition that expresses things as moving in succession, that organizes things. Like space, we grasp time as infinite because it is a universal condition of our experience. And so I want to go back now to this problem of the idea of representation of time, an a priori representation of time, the difference between an intuition and a representation, which is, I think, a little ambiguous here for Kant. And in particular, Kant wants to say that time is not a concept. and time is not something that we grasp through any kind of empirical concept or anything empirical. But so then, what is this idea of a line progressing to infinity? Right? What is the understanding of time as a line or as an arrow? How do we grasp time as linear and infinite as such, infinite as a line? And in thinking of time as a line, there is a sort of strange consequence that we spatialize time in this way. We understand time metaphorically as a line, as some kind of external appearance. Right? A line is an empirical concept derived from sensory data. It is not part of our pure intuition. So why do we represent time to ourselves in this way? Isn't it wrong to give this inner form of time an outer form, like a line? So Kant's answer is that this representation is inadequate. We imagine the line as simultaneous. Right? We think of time as a concept. We picture a line going forward to infinity. But that's to imagine all time points as existing simultaneously, which is fundamentally to fail to grasp time as a concept, because time is not simultaneity, but is necessarily successive. So the image isn't quite right. And this is, I think, evidence of our limited cognitive capacity and of the fact, the way that time is not conceptual. So time is not a representation as an idea or concept. We apply concepts to it, but they don't grasp it. It is a representation as an agent of representation. Time is an agent of representation. What gives representation? Part of the receptivity of what is given. So we can't say time is a line. We say there is succession, and no outer intuition properly expresses this. Succession is understandable only in the way that the passing of our thoughts, the passing of our impressions, the passing of our experience is understandable, right? Try to really get a hold on how thinking unfolds, how succession works in pure thinking or reflection. That would be like trying to grasp the concept of time as succession. It isn't per se a line or linear.